Hey engagement fans, welcome back to the Engagement Studio. I'm Megan Maslanka.
And I'm Aaron Brown. We're members of the Insights team here at Quantum Workplace, and today we're going to talk about the ways that 360 feedback can backfire.
And how to prevent it. A lot of times your 360 feedback programs are designed with really good intent, but a few missteps and all of your effort can go to waste.
So we're going to cover the 6 most common mistakes that happen. The first is that there is a lack of connection to what really matters in your organization. So a lot of the times we'll see that HR partners might just go on Google and download the best 360 questions to ask without really connecting it back to what's important in their organization.
Yep, this one's really easy to prevent. When you're designing your 360 feedback program, make sure you connect it to what really matters. Your leadership principles, your competencies, your values and behaviors in the organization. By having that connection, it will really encourage development from the 360 feedback.
Mistake number 2 is there's a lack of communication about the process and the program in place. So we may not communicate why it matters or what the next steps might be. But we fail to really engage leaders and managers and employees in the process.
Mm-hmm. Again, this one is a pretty simple one to fix, but ultimately you want to make sure you are communicating with your key stakeholders. That includes not only the people that are completing or receiving the feedback, but those giving feedback, and kind of organizationally set the tone that this is how we help leaders develop. So when you are thinking about rolling out another program or you're in another wave of assessments, make sure you communicate to all 3 key stakeholders.
The third most common mistake is that there tends to be a lack of trust in the process, and this is especially crucial for organizations that may be dealing with mistrust, whether it's mistrust at the leader levels or the manager levels. If employees don't feel like they can be open and honest with their feedback, they just may end up being very generic in their criticism or very overly positive in how they communicate back to leaders and managers throughout the process.
Mm-hmm. This one's a little bit more difficult. When you think about preventing that misstep with your 360, when you have low trust in the organization, a lot of times you want to build in some practices that help the employee feel more comfortable with giving feedback. When you think about where you're at in your trust spectrum, think about if you're using anonymous feedback for your 360s or attributed. Attributed feedback has to be a little bit more constructive, and then we'll talk about a couple other missteps that help reinforce that trust.
So the fourth most common mistake is that we limit who gets to participate. Oftentimes we'll see that HR partners only think that the 360 program is suited for high-level leadership, whether it's VPs and above or directors and above, but we fail to understand that all employees can really benefit from the program, whether they're frontline, individual contributors, all the way up through C-suite.
This is great. So one of the things to do to prevent this misstep is to make sure that you're thinking about rolling out your 360 program to all members. So a lot of times organizations start with senior leaders because they can demonstrate and lead by example, but you want to give the opportunity for others in your organization to be able to collect that 360 feedback. 360 should not be exclusive.
The fifth most common mistake is that we feel that we need to keep all feedback anonymous. That is, nobody knows who's saying what, we don't know who the reviewers are, we don't know really who's participating in the program. This can make people feel like they don't trust what's being said to them, or they don't feel like they understand the feedback. Maybe they can't clarify what's happening or what's occurring in the feedback. And it does allow the feedback givers a chance to just throw stones over the wall without really taking into regard who they're throwing the stones at over the wall. They may be overly destructive or too generic.
Mm-hmm. Yep, we touched a little bit on this one earlier, but obviously when you're thinking about designing how someone will receive that feedback, be empathetic to that receiver. That means a lot of times we recommend having attributed feedback so that individuals can really learn from that feedback and follow up. Let's say Aaron gives me some feedback that I was unaware of. I have now, because it's attributed, I have the chance to follow up with Aaron versus wondering where this came from or feeling like, again, someone's throwing those stones blindly over the wall.
And the last step the last common mistake that we're going to talk about today is the fact that we often don't have a plan for follow-up. We don't have a communication system in place to know what the next steps in the process are. So employees, they'll give their feedback, managers will review the feedback, they'll look at all the criticism, look at all the notes about kind of how they're doing, but then they have no idea for what next steps to take with that feedback.
This one is where HR can help play a role and help guide and support the leaders and employees going through 360 feedback. We recommend kind of 3 simple things. First, encourage your receivers to have a one-on-one conversation about that feedback that was received with their manager or with a mentor in the organization. Don't let all of that feedback just sit with the receiver themselves. Second, think about adding a development goal in place. If I receive feedback and one of the things I need to work on is my presentation skills or my communication skills, work with your mentor or your manager on really setting a developmental goal with some rigor. That will help you improve on that feedback. And third and final, one of the simplest things to do, probably the most vulnerable for leaders though, is to actually share the feedback with team, or if you're an individual contributor, share the feedback that you've received at a higher level with the broader team. By sharing that feedback, you get the chance to thank everyone and appreciate their feedback, but also does give room for the fact that everyone has a chance to improve. And again, it's a little bit of a vulnerable spot for that receiver, but it really pays off in building that trust.
So those are the 6 most common mistakes that we often see when implementing a 360 feedback program, and we hope that you can avoid these common mistakes in hopes to make the program most successful.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us today at the Engagement Studio. Let's go make work better every day.